Medicine is what I call the clitoral conspiracy. Like, they're behind it. They're behind withholding information about the clitoris. The clitoris and the penis are actually the same tissue. If you are not a vulva owner, you are likely not familiar with where the clitoris is. And the best way to approach pleasuring your partner is to ask them.
So when you start having trouble with erections, it might be a sign that blood flow is decreasing. You're going to see problems manifest themselves in your sexual life before you do in your heart, for example, for chest pain. We're not taught this in anatomy class. We're barely taught anything at all in elementary school, right? But
I want to kick things off by talking about the clitoris.
Yeah.
So you actually shared in your book that the clitoris was actually taken out of a really major anatomy book at one point. Like, we're that disconnected from the clitoris. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's most surprising to people is like medicine is what I call the clitoral conspiracy. Like, they're behind it. They're behind withholding information about the clitoris. So it was removed from Grey's Anatomy, and it wasn't until the 90s that it was acknowledged, but all the media was like, clitoris was discovered. It wasn't actually discovered. It was like, okay, we're finally at a place where we can like acknowledge this. And even then, it's taken decades for people to get the knowledge in their hands. And I mean, even still, I mean, the book has 2 clitoral diagrams. So you will see a clitoris in 2 different chapters. And my publishers were like, okay, so you want both of these? I'm like, yes, because we need to have like, this is the clitoris on its own, and this is the clitoris as it exists in the vulva. So you can have some concept, because it's been information withheld from us for a very long time. And it is behind so much frustration, misunderstandings, and the orgasm gap, which is like I say, it's a big abyss that like not even the world's like greatest daredevil could jump it.
So in talking about the clitoris, what is its actual function?
Oh, it only exists for pleasure. So a lot of people, maybe they remember it from biology, but maybe you didn't have that good of a biology teacher, so no fault there. The clitoris and the penis are actually the same tissue. So when we start off as embryos, we are only deviating once that XY pair gets washed over with testosterone. So the Y in response to testosterone goes penis, scrotum, testicles, and that penis is derived from the same tissue as the clitoris, except the penis also has to ejaculate and deliver urine. Multifunctional, that's kind of cool, but can't be too sensitive, right? It also is involved in pleasure, which I think we can all accept. The clitoris, nothing but pleasure. That's it.
Yeah. And when you mentioned earlier, by the way, Grey's Anatomy, you make the distinction in the book. It's not the TV show.
Not the
We're talking
TV
about
show.
the anatomy book.
Yeah.
And there was a time period where the clitoris was just taken out of this text. And it's so unfortunate because, again, as you mentioned, this is an aspect of pleasure.
Yeah.
And I think that in our culture, we've been kind of manipulated into removing pleasure from the equation, and also not even considering pleasure for women in a strange way. It's just like, this is the way that we do it. And, you know, that's kind of the end of the story. But let's talk a little bit about the pleasure aspect when it comes to the clitoris and just sex in general, because you point out so many of the questions that your patients have had over the years. And I showed you the emoji. I drew an emoji of like an, oh my God, face in the book. And I had my jaw dropped at so many points throughout the book, just riveted with the information. But they're asking essentially, is this normal?
Yeah.
You know, is the way that my clitoris looks normal? The way that my vagina looks, is that normal? And you also talk about, so number one, let's talk about pleasure.
Yeah.
And let's talk about when people are asking, like, is it normal for me to have an orgasm or to not have an orgasm? Or is it being difficult to have an orgasm?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, what do you remember from your sex ed?
Oh my goodness. First of all, wildly uncomfortable, right?
Yes.
And because I was in 8th grade. I remember I was in 8th grade, and it was very, very primitive in a sense, you know, as far as education is concerned.
Yeah, yeah.
But if we would be more primitive, to be honest, it would be a lot better. But, you know, we had the banana scenario with the condom. It was a lot of fear-based information. It was framed in a way about fear.
Yeah.
And there was no acknowledgement of pleasure. It's just kind of something that you want to avoid. right? So that's what I remember.
Yeah, well, you're spot on. That's the majority of people. They get a fear-based education. And what has been found through the research is that when you actually have pleasure-based education, you see lower incidences of STIs. People, they delay when they have their first sexual activity. They're more monogamous. They report that the first time is pleasurable. The first time is fun. In the United States, we don't have that. We have that fear-based. And so what people often report is that the first time they felt pressured, they regret it, they felt coerced sometimes, and they felt like they did something wrong, like a lot of shame around it. So there's other countries that are doing that more pleasure-based focus. And even the World Health Organization they have statements where they're like, when we teach pleasure first, like sex can be fun and safe. People are more safe when sex is fun. And when you ask people what the condom on the banana, people are like, I remember the condom on the banana. I don't know why. Why do we put a condom on a banana? Why do we wear condoms? Like, because that fear-based approach basically starts shutting you down. You can't take in information. You're just like, oh my God, sex is the scariest thing. The other thing we see is when pleasure is the focus. So like in the Netherlands, Germany, they have done a great job, and we have had generation basically go through this, that now we have young adults who have had that education. And so I think that's phenomenal. We're getting these outcomes. They also have less frequency of unintended pregnancies compared to the United States, which has 18 states offering medically accurate sex education. Very few are giving consent as part of that. And almost no one is talking about pleasure. And especially when it comes to the female body, the conversation is usually like, vagina, that is where blood and babies come out and penises go in. And everything is very male-centered, because male pleasure results in ejaculation. Ejaculation results in babies. And the only reason you should have sex is so that you have a baby. If that's the thinking, then it's going to be male-centered, because having an orgasm, there's an upsuck theory I talk about in the book, but having an orgasm for a woman, that's not necessary for baby making. Like, she just has to like retrieve sperm. Like, sperm has to just make its way into the canal. I would actually say like, no, pleasure is very important in the baby making experience. But with all of that, I think what people miss out on is the concept that life should be pleasurable. So you talk to a lot of people in the health space. I talk to a lot of people in the health space. I get really just like salty about the like food is fuel, and like, you know, if you're enjoying it, like it is just like to be fueling your body. And I'm like, disrespectfully, no. Okay. Like, that's not my jam. Like, food should be pleasurable. You know, being with your partner, like being with someone else, like this should be pleasurable. Like, as humans, we are wired to seek pleasure and to have these pleasurable experiences. And that is about quality of life. That is going to have a major impact on your health. Whereas like, you know, if everything is just going through the motions, you're not going to be mindful. We're not going to have that mindfulness. We're not going to have the full human experience. And that begs the question, like, why the hell are you even here?
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. The eat to live, don't live to eat phenomenon. The thing is, just getting back to like a basic perception of this stuff, we're driven to eat things because they taste good. That's like why we have taste buds.
Yeah.
And it's an important part of our life and our evolution. And the same thing with sex. We just see it as like, this is why we're born, is to procreate, keep the species going. But what drives us to want to do the thing is that it's supposed to be pleasurable.
Yeah. You're supposed to like it.
And it seems so unfair that it takes the pleasure and the education on pleasure for women out of the equation in so much of what we've been taught as a people. Even when we are going outside of the kind of textbook education, which is so unfortunate, but then looking into the world of like things like where a lot of people are learning about how to do it is from pornography.
You should see my browser history, friend. So like, really, in searching for this book, when people ask me questions, I'm like, why are they asking that? Like, you know, because as a doctor, it's like, I know where I got this information. I have this information now, but like, okay, so I'm not a doctor. Where do they get these ideas? And so this is a big reason for the book as well, is that I want parents to have this information, to learn this, and then be the expert in their own house, so that their children come to them before they go to a seedy website like I have landed on, because that information seems really legit the way it's positioned. And then you're met with like non-consensual, explicit images. And I say it's non-consensual because I didn't know what I was entering into. And then, they're met with that, like, and they're not ready maybe for that. That's overwhelming to see those images and the things that are going on. And I think, back when we were growing up, there wasn't the internet to go like find this information on. You were like, I was like Dewey Decimal System and it like going through the library being like, what the hell is going on with my period here? And there were like no books. I'm like looking at medical books and being like, well, like this does not explain why I'm in so much pain. So, I think at every generation, we've all like wondered, like, is this normal? And have tried to like covertly seek out that information because we feel so ashamed. And I'm really hoping this book is going to help people get their questions answered, but also prepare them to be the expert in their own house. Like we see in these other countries that are having better outcomes. Like these children have open communication with their parents. Like these parents are teaching their toddlers consent. And people are like, they don't need to learn consent. Like consent's a sex thing. No. Teaching someone it's okay to say, I don't want a hug or have to ask before you like take a hug. That is okay. Like that is a good thing to be doing, arguably. But in these countries, like they're like teens. So I mean, to me as a mom, they're like kids, but like they're young adults. They're having open conversations with their parents, which is what is helping lower their risk and making sure that they're staying safe. So it's this open communication, this pleasure first, and moving out of that fear-based state that's having the best outcomes of what we really want as parents.
Just to circle the conversation back to this important aspect of human anatomy that has to deal with pleasure.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, you also go through the spectrum in the book of people's concerns about their ability to experience pleasure.
Yeah.
And you talk about the kind of biochemical aspect and also the psychological mental aspect and how that all is married together. But we tend to not think about these things.
Yeah.
It's just like, are you doing it or not? Do you feel like it's a chore? Do you enjoy it? We have these kind of life experiences of the thing, but we're not thinking about what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about number one, the how. I want to talk a little bit about the how to give pleasure through being more clitorate. But also I want to talk about the resistance or the barriers to pleasure that are often occurring for women today.
So I have to say, Being More Clitorate, Ian Kern is a great book for all men to read. She Comes First, and he came up with that term. And I think it is one of my favorite terms ever because it is exactly what everybody needs to get to that pleasure. So if you are not a vulva owner, you are likely not familiar with where the clitoris is. And the best way to approach pleasuring your partner is to ask them what they like. And so in the book, I do show like, here's where the clitoris is and how to find it. And then I go over, that is the key way to orgasm. So once upon a time, Freud ruined everything. And he was like, the vaginal orgasm is what every woman should aspire to because the clitoral orgasm is very infantile. What he was really saying is I'd like to put my penis in there and you should enjoy it no matter what if you are like the star woman, right? Like if you have achieved these things. So again, very male-centered, where in reality, majority of women are not going to have an orgasm via penile penetration. So the way most people think of sex, they're like penis and vagina. There's a whole chapter of sex of all kinds, and you can find that there is many ways to approach this that bring pleasure for people. So a lot of people, they're taught that, right? In sex ed, like that's what sex is. And then men, like they have so much pressure on them. I think this doesn't get talked about enough about how they're supposed to be a stallion in the bedroom. They please women. They should go forever. The research is actually like women don't want you to go forever. They just want you to love up the clitoris. Like this is what they want. And men don't get taught about the clitoris. And I think it's really unfortunate that they are always like at the butt of jokes. And, it's like, oh, a man can't find the clit. Like he wants to find it. Okay, he does. But like, nobody teaches us how to even have conversations about sex. And it's like very simple of like, do you like this? Would you like more of this? How's this pressure? Like those kinds of things. But a lot of people are like, I can't even say that in the bedroom. So Finding the clitoris is first. If you start at the top where there may or may not be hair, but the mons pubis, there's a little patch usually up there, like it's a soft spot, and you come down, you're going to find the clitoris. The external part is going to be right there underneath the clitoral hood. And if you're stimulating that, starting with usually, so per the research, I'm going to say this is per the research in general, but you have to ask your partner because they know their body best. Imagine that. Is actually starting with a rhythmic motion. It's about medium pressure, and most women prefer a back and forth or circular motion. And it's very easy to get excited. So anybody listening, if you do get excited and you start to speed up and they're like, ow, don't do that. That's just them being like, on the tarmac, like this way, that way. They're just giving you instructions. It's nothing personal, and it's normal to get excited and then to like speed things up. So asking them, checking in with them. So that's the way that you approach that. The other thing I would say is loop. There's so many times in the book that I was reading the audiobook and I'm like, how many times do I say loop? And I'm like, you know what? Still not enough, because I still see things like on TikTok. There's this bro, he's like, if she's not wet, she's not the one. I was like, well, arguably you're not the one, sir. I don't think you understand how this works. But also it's normal, especially based on certain times of our cycle or where our hormones are at, for things to be a little more dry. So that's the clitoral component. You wanted to talk about hormones as well. So where do you want to go with hormones in that conversation?
Before we transition from the clitoris.
Okay. We can stay on it.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. So before we leave this area, with that stimulation, can the clitoris change?
Oh, yes. Okay, so do penises change? Yes. Clitoris, same thing. Tissue becomes engorged. It becomes erect. And it's important to understand that sometimes there's a disconnect between brain and genitals. And so this is known as arousal non-concordance. The research is like, wait a minute, brain is lighting up. Like, I love this. I'm like, this is pleasure. And the genitals are like not on board just yet. Like, what's happening? Sometimes there's a disconnect in that memo. So things won't get as wet. Maybe the clitoris is not getting as engorged yet. Maybe tenting hasn't occurred yet. That's when the vagina makes way. It's like, we might have penetration. So let's just like make the space a little bit larger just in case, so that it's comfortable and pleasurable. So that sometimes you're like really into it, but the genitals just haven't gotten there yet. And then other times, I've had people, so once people figured out, I told them, Ask Dr. Brighten is anonymous on Instagram. I started getting all kinds of messages. And one of them is that I just found so interesting is like, I'm scrolling through social media and I will find that I'm really turned on. And sometimes like I'm heterosexual, but I'm really turned on by this woman. Am I like gay and I didn't know it, or like what's happening? And really what's going on is the brain is surveying sex, and the brain's like, hey, that's sex. And the genitals are like, woohoo, sex, let's get ready. And then you're like, no, I'm not into this. You're not into this. And so the end all be all of this story is that the genitals are not in charge. The brain is in charge. So consent is either yes or no. And if the genitals are saying yes, but the brain says no, it's still no.
Wow. And also, contrary to popular belief, the brain is really the biggest sexual organ, and I shared some research, and we'll put it up on the screen for everybody. But this research team, the lead investigator, he spent like a couple of decades studying female orgasm.
Yeah.
And it lights up like 30 areas of the brain, indicating more blood flow, circulation, infusion of nutrients, all those good things.
Exactly why you can live longer with more orgasms.
And it so outperforms anything else that we're doing for brain health.
Yeah.
Like, doing some Sudoku or, crossword puzzles for brain health. It lights up a couple of areas. It's something so remarkable.
Yeah.
As far as the human brain, we're talking about orgasm.
Yeah. And the fact that it is an act of mindfulness, like you have to be so present to be able to achieve orgasm. This is where it can be so difficult, where women are like, I'm in the mood, I'm aroused, and then I'm not. Like, really common to have that happen. And if it's happening, usually it's like, it's the things that like we all do. And if you're a woman, you never have done this, like, tell me your secrets of where you're like, I'm sitting in this position, like, I'm thinking about how does my body look? You're in sex and you're like, oh, are they noticing my stretch marks? I'm in this position right now. Like, can they see my roles? Like, oh, like, what does this look like? You're spectatoring. You're like leaving your body and observing what's going on. I was just like, thinking, I was actually listening to Kendrick Lamar, and he's like, show me something real, like an ass with some stretch marks. And I'm like, he wants an ass with some stretch marks, ladies. Like, Kendrick, okay? He's like into this. Okay, so he's into this. And most people who are having sex with you, they're lucky enough to be having sex with you. They're not even thinking about that. Their brain is flooded with all these things that they can't pay attention. So it's really easy to fall out of arousal and be very frustrated and unable to orgasm because you're running all this like fear, right? Oh my God, like they didn't get STI tested, and your poor body like overrode you on any common sense, like no judges on that, because it was like brain was like sex. And like you said, orgasms so good for the brain. The hormones that it releases, like literally anti-aging, like take you backwards, like compared to all the stress hormones that we are experiencing every day. Why wouldn't your body want to seek that out? Why wouldn't your body want those things? Like that is a total normal experience.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So in the book, you also talk about some of the mental barriers and also biochemical barriers.
Yeah.
Because again, hearing all this is just like, I want that. And also even in our timeline, in our story, maybe you were with somebody and at the beginning of your relationship, you guys just couldn't keep your hands off each other.
It's
then
always that way, right?
Kids happen, life happens, all the thing. And now it's become like something other than.
Yeah.
And, I saw this one particular line that you shared. It was, you were quoting one of your patients. And basically she said, I want to go back to that.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just kind of like a fantasy. It's like, but it's so distant because of life stuff. So can you talk a little bit about, number one, let's talk about some of the psychological aspects that could be a barrier to sex and enjoying sex. And then we can talk about hormones after that.
Okay. So when it comes to barriers, I think, for men, it's very linear. And so I'm not a man, but I think for men, they're like, this is the way it works for me. Therefore, like, this is the way it should work for you. And whenever I start talking about this information, somebody rolls in and they're like, this doesn't take into account what I do every day. And I go to work and I work so hard. So when I come home, I shouldn't have to do anything else. And she should just be having sex with me. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that what you're not intending to say, but what you are saying is that you're entitled to her body, you're entitled to sex, and that like no matter what you do, that's yours, like no matter what. And it's not that way for women. So yes, we like orgasms. Yes, we like pleasure. Sometimes we have sex because we want to bond. We want to feel more intimate. Some women are stressed and they're like, I know this is going to help, because oxytocin will be like, shut up, cortisol. Like we're not even going to hear that right now. So there's a lot of reasons why women will enter into sex. And there's a lot of reasons that can shut down a woman wanting to have sex. So there's a great model. These researchers came up with a sexual excitation and inhibition model. And in the book, I talk about inhibition is basically like the brakes. And then we have the gas pedal, which is excitation. And if you've ever tried to drive a car, and maybe you have done this, with your foot on the brake and you're pushing on the accelerator, maybe it goes, but it doesn't go the way, it's not smooth. It's not an easy glide. And sex is like the same way. So we have to understand, which is why I put a quiz in the book, like how touchy are gas pedals? So maybe you're someone who's just like sex on the brain all the time. And how touchy are the brakes? And what most men tend to focus on, and like we're talking about heterosexual relationships because that's where the orgasm gap and this pleasure gap exists. For most men, they're like, okay, roses, scented candles, get a bubble bath, buy her lingerie, like let's hit the accelerator. What women mostly need is dampening of the brakes. And so if you think about like your nervous system being like a train track, and the train is the sex train, like getting to the brain saying like, hey, sex time. So the brain can like receive that package and be like, let's go. It's the things that are outside the bedroom that become barriers. So maybe she had a really hard day and she wants to talk to you about that. And you're like, yeah, not now, the game's on. I'll talk to you later. Break. And then she had asked you like, oh, I asked you to pick up these things at the store. Like, were you able to do that? You said you'd pick that up. Oh yeah, I couldn't find this thing. So I got this one thing, but like you can pick it up on your way home tomorrow. another break. She had an incredibly stressful day at work. Like everything was like, falling apart. Like, so that break already existed. That had nothing to do with you, but that already existed. And then, she goes into the bedroom and it's the end of the day and she's super tired. And she's like, oh my God, I just slipped on a pair of his underwear because he couldn't make it into the laundry basket again. Break. Now, this feels like sometimes to a man hearing this, like, you're just harping on me about all of that. But like literally, these are things that are putting breaks in her nervous system. So the game's over. And for you, you're just like, ooh, like she's bending over in the freezer, like getting some ice. Like, I'm into this. Like, let me rub up on her, because that's all it took for you. You try to send that sexy signal and that train cannot get through all of those barriers. So then it's that feeling of like, she's not into me, like I'm being rejected, when in reality, she can't process that. She can't pick it up. Like her brain has to clear those blockades before she's able to actually get that signal. And so those are just some of the relationship breaks. I mean, we can also have breaks like, I don't want to get pregnant, but like I don't have my birth control prescription, or we don't have any condoms. And like that's going to be a hard break for a lot of people, where they're like, well, a lot of women, especially in the current state of the United States, are going to be like, break, can't do it. Like I'm too afraid right now.
Yeah. Wow. I love this analogy with the gas, again, because you could even, again, have the intention and have feelings like I want to do it, but then having the brake on at the same time with all these other things, the psychological factors, this could deter the action of sex, but also the fulfillment of sex as well.
Yeah.
So we've got this part. Now let's talk a little bit about what can be happening with our biochemistry, especially at different times of our lives. When I say our, I'm including myself in teen women right now, but at different times in women's lives, and also different times of the month.
Yeah. Well, what I came across in the research and I absolutely loved was this concept of the sexual phase. So, and I will say that in my program and my book, I do talk about the ovulatory phase. And I'm going to say what I love about the idea of the sexual phase is that if you don't want to have a baby for whatever reason, it's a way of looking at your cycle that doesn't just reduce you to your reproductive capacity. For my program, I wanted people to actually understand ovulation and understand all of the hormones, but that naming it the sexual phase is so brilliant. So for people who are like, ovulation, sexual phase, what are we talking about? Let's break it down. So there's a hormone called luteinizing hormone. It leaves the brain and it hits the ovaries and says, ovulate that egg. So, and then what happens is about 24 to 48 hours later, an egg is released. That's ovulation, which, by the way, you only ovulate once in a cycle and it only has about 24 hours to live. So you can only get pregnant one day of the month, but sperm can live 5. And why this matters is because about 3 days before that LH spike, you're going to be in the mood. You're going to see libido going up. This is estrogen and testosterone. They're scheming. They're like, there's supposed to be an egg and we're going to get some like sperm. And it does not care what relationship you're in or who you sleep with. Like the biology, the ovaries are like, we have an agenda. Like this is what we're doing. So about 3 days before that LH spike, the day of the LH spike, and then about a day or two after, that's the sexual phase. That's going to be the peak of your sexual excitation. Women fantasize more. So there's more fantasies. This is when you might be scrolling TikTok and you're like, ooh, they look so good. Or you're on the grocery store checkout line and you're like, on the magazine, like my brain is registering sex. Like it's going to be higher at this phase of your cycle. Easier to get aroused. Orgasms happen quicker. They can be a lot more intense, and multiples are easier to achieve during this phase of the cycle. This is why it's the sexual phase of the cycle. Now, why it's about 1 to 2 days after the LH spike. Once you ovulate, there is a structure. It's a temporary endocrine structure left in the ovaries called the corpus luteum. It produces progesterone. And progesterone is like, you know what? Let's get into some sweatpants rather than getting into their pants. Like, I'm not into that. You already did the egg thing. We don't need it. We don't need any of that. So you might be more inclined to like cuddling, make out sessions, and like maybe less inclined to be seeking out sex. However, you still can have sex during that time. And it's important to have that progesterone up, because if it's not, estrogen comes up, you become more critical of your partner, you're cranky, you're bloated, like your breasts are tender, like that. None of that is sexy time. And this is also going to be one of the driest times of your cycle. So As you leave ovulation, you're entering the luteal phase. And then as progesterone is rising about 5 to 7 days afterwards, now down there is feeling a lot more dry. It's harder to, maybe it takes you longer to orgasm. It's taking you longer to get aroused. You're not self-lubricating. That's all normal because that's how the hormones are operating and that's how they're designed. This is also such a common time where men are like, there's like this tweet that like goes viral. Like everybody just keeps reposting it. And I see it. And the guy's like, why is it like 1 minute women are like so into us? And then the next, like she could care less about me. I'm like, that's progesterone. That's ovulation. Like prior to ovulation, she was like, I cannot keep my hands off you. You are everything. Post ovulation, she's like, nah. Like, nah. And like, that's all normal. And so it just requires understanding your body, understanding your partner's body, and having open communication around that.
It absolutely matters. So we like to say sexual health is health, right? When you have normal functioning genitals, right, that fill with blood, that have good sensation, that respond appropriately to erotic stimuli, that tells you a lot about your overall body, right? That you have good vascular blood flow, that you have, intact nerves, that you don't have anything going on in the background that might be creating an issue. And very often we're seeing it in the genitals before we see it elsewhere. So we like to say for men that erectile dysfunction is the canary in the coal mine. So when you start having trouble with erections, or maybe you're not getting that morning erection that you used to get as often as you used to, it might be a sign that blood flow is decreasing. And you're going to see it first there because the arteries to the penis or the clitoris for women, for example, are 1 to 2 millimeters, whereas arteries to the heart are 3 to 4 millimeters. So you're going to see problems manifest themselves in your sexual life before you do in your heart, for example, for chest pain.
Wow. So our bodies are literally giving us physical feedback if we're paying attention. So mentioning blood flow, what would be the equivalent for women erectile dysfunction?
So it would be the sensation of a decrease of arousal. So arousal for women is, having good lubrication. And that's not always the case. I don't want people to feel like if they don't have enough lubrication, it's just because there's something wrong with blood flow. It could be a hormonal issue, but certainly lubrication, having that sensation of like feeling the pressure in your genitals where it's feeling more engorged. So that sort of sensation being not as prominent as it used to be potentially.
Now, with the blood flow correlation, and you mentioned this just a few minutes ago, is this similar? So is there arousal that's seen with the clitoris? Let's just talk about the clitoris. Let's have a clitoris masterclass.
Yes, let's do it. So the clitoris is the homologue of the penis. So when you think about embryology or the way we're developed, when you look at a embryo, you have what's called a genital tubercle. And that in the male becomes the penis and in the female becomes the clitoris. And if you take an anatomic section of the clitoris and the penis and you cut them down the middle, you're going to see they look exactly the same. They are two cylindrical bodies that fill with blood and gorge with blood and are basically a long shaft. So what you see of the clitoris, you're just seeing the head, you're just seeing the glands, just like the glands of the penis. So that's what you see visibly. But then deep inside, they're getting the shaft of the clitoris, and then it separates to get the crura. And the men have it too. It separates to the crura. And so that's sort of the exact anatomical homologue. It's just displayed differently, right? External genitalia look differently, but the erotic tissue is the same.
Holy moly. And also I'm thinking about the hood as well.
Like the prepuce of the male or like the foreskin of the male. So same exact thing. And interestingly, what a lot of people don't realize is that women also can sort of pull that back and clean under it because sometimes they can develop smegma or sort of dead skin cells or oils that sort of get stuck between the clitoral hood and the clitoris that can then create discomfort, pain, maybe muted orgasms. So we're not taught this in anatomy class. We're barely taught anything at all in elementary school, right? But you're not really taught this. And so it's important to understand the anatomy, and that's going to be your key, right? You can understand yourself, explore yourself, and then you can explore your partner because now you know the anatomy is essentially the same. It's just slightly in a different location.
All right. I just flashed back to that middle school sex ed class that I had, and we were explicitly told that the vagina was the sexual organ, right? The clitoris wasn't even in the conversation. Nope. And so with this being said, this being the equivalent, so this would automatically for us have a light bulb go off that this is the organ of pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the only organ in the entire human body that's only for pleasure, right? The penis has the urethra, the urine comes out of there. So the clitoris is literally only there for pleasure. There is no other purpose of the clitoris. And so it's a shame that we don't even get taught that, right? That is the only organ. And so the vagina, is essentially underneath the clitoris, right? So absolutely women get pleasure from stimulation of the vagina because the clitoris sits right on top of it. There's also different nerve endings and things, sort of areas like the G-spot or the cervix that have nerve endings that can be felt as pleasurable when stimulated. And so definitely it can be an organ of pleasure, but the clitoris is the most direct route for pleasure. So it's as if for our male listeners, if someone stimulated your scrotum, yeah, maybe it'd feel good, but it's not going to feel as good as if someone stimulates your penis. So similarly, sort of that's the analogy.
Now, with this being said, and the clitoris being the hub of, you said something so remarkable, exclusively for pleasure. There's no other organ in human anatomy that is just about pleasure. This is a big question here, and I know that there isn't a cookie cutter answer for this, but if we can just get into the majority conversation, how do we go about pleasuring the clitoris?
Yeah. So think about how, everyone sort of has a different pressure sensation, pressure threshold, but you need stimulation of the clitoris. So that can be light touch, that can be firm touch, that can be vibration, that can be using oral sex. I mean, a whole variety of things. But the key is communication, right? Because just like, things will work for the majority of men, things will work for the majority of women, but everyone's a little different, right? And if you've had enough sexual partners, you'll know that there's someone who likes this and someone who likes that. And so you got to talk to each other and be like, what do you like? What, and we need to normalize asking and also telling or even non-verbally telling, right? Like move a little this way or move a little that way or whatever it is, but just sort of being open to exploration and talking about it and playing, right? Because it's supposed to be fun. And so I think those things are really valuable and important to really figure out what is the stimulation that your individual partner likes. And you might not get it right the first time or a couple times or here or there. It might not work exactly the way you want it to, but as you learn your partner and you get experience with that, then you can sort of, decide what works better. And I think always keep some diversity, keep some variability. You don't want to keep serving up the same script every time.
Oh, don't want to watch the same rerun over and over again.
Yeah.
Now, with this being said, the communication part, I know people, obviously we have very diverse ways of communicating. So I would imagine that different contexts would be helpful with communication. Some people, it might be on the ground training as it's going down. Some people outside of the act, maybe you're having dinner, maybe you're just hanging out and you're talking about it.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
What we say in sexual health is foreplay starts at breakfast, right? Sex is not just the only place where you're sort of building up pleasure. You should be building up that flirtation, that discussion, potentially earlier in the date or whenever you're with your partner, so that there's some anticipation, some excitement going into it. But also, I think it's really empowering to tell somebody what you're into or even ask them, what are you into? Right. And that can be outside of the bedroom, and probably it's better to be outside the bedroom, right? Because then it puts people sort of more insecure if you're doing it right before, you're like, oh, I'm really into this. And you're like, I wasn't mentally prepared for that. Right. So sort of actually, before you get into the bedroom, maybe when you're in the car or when you're sitting at the dinner table or wherever you find it comfortable, just to, sort of broach the subject. And everyone's going to respond a little differently. And if they've never talked about sex before, they may respond negatively. But I think you'll be like, look, I'm just trying to make sure that we have the most fun possible. And I'd love to know more about what you like. And I think making it a non-threatening, sort of just open-ended way. And if they don't respond appropriately, maybe you try again later, right? But certainly just trying to build that up so that you guys can both have or multiple partners for whatever you're into, can have an open discussion about what sort of you enjoy and what your partner enjoys and what your expectations are and that sort of stuff.
Awesome. So I have you here, so I'm going to ask the question. Yeah. Is there a certain spot on the clitoris that might be, more acclimated towards pleasure, towards orgasm. Is that a thing?
Well, generally the visible part of the clitoris is very sort of the most sensitive part, just like the glans or the head of the penis is very sensitive. So yeah, that tends to be the easiest and most reliable route to orgasm. Now, the G spot, which is sort of in the vagina, but also is part of, it's not a spot. Let's reframe. It's an erogenous zone. It's misnomer called the G spot. It's an erogenous zone. So it's an area where it's underneath the clitoris. So you're getting some stimulation of the clitoris. There's also the Skene's glands, which are the homologue, again, that same word, to the male prostate. And so that has some nerve endings that are pleasurable. And then the distal third of the vagina has the most nerve endings. So basically it's about 2 to 3 centimeters in the vagina on the anterior wall. And so that area can be quite pleasurable for some people, but it's not always going to be as reliable, and not everyone's going to have an orgasm with stimulation of the G zone. But it is something that you can experiment with.
Okay, so to break this down, all right, so the G spot, i.e. this erogenous zone.
Correct.
The general location of this, you said the anterior side, so this is the belly
top
side,
yep.
right? And 2 to 3 inches in. And so I would imagine there are a variety of ways that you could interact with that area.
Yeah.
Like what are some ways to go about that?
So it can be obviously through manual stimulation is probably what people talk about most, sort of like introducing some sort of digit and then manually stimulating that area. It can be with a toy. It can
Love how you said digits.
We got to make it medical, you know? So yeah, it can be with a toy, and there's toys that are sort of like shaped in certain ways to stimulate that area. It can be with your phallus. And so a variety of different ways, but again, experimenting, and vibration is always a really great tool. It actually has been shown to improve orgasmic intensity, to improve satisfaction. And so it's great to bring accoutrements to the bedroom if you feel comfortable. And, I think it's sort of fun to experiment with different types of things, and it may allow for more pleasure. And if you are really someone who enjoys seeing your partner have pleasure, then that may also be a great way. And they can show you too. You can watch them stimulate themselves to decide what is actually really enjoyable for them. So then you know how to emulate that.
Amazing. Amazing. I want to talk about this because, a lot of the conversation regarding health, especially in conventional medicine, is focused on the male and erectile dysfunction. And it's ridiculous how this isn't discussed and this is why your work is so remarkable, because you're addressing these issues and talking about women's health and sexual dysfunction.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the common issues that women deal with regarding sexual dysfunction, and of course, talk about some solutions as well.
Absolutely. So the most common one that we hear about is low sex drive or low libido. And actually, when you look at survey studies or studies where they've, inquired about how many percentage of women have low libido, it's up to 40%. So that's pretty high. But it's not that all 40% of those women are feeling bothered by it, right? It's usually about 12% that experience some bother associated with low desire. And there's other buckets of sexual dysfunction too, right? There's difficulty with orgasm, or maybe not having an orgasm at all. There's difficulties with arousal, which are less common, but they do occur. So we see it a lot in men, obviously, with erectile dysfunction, but with women, it's usually less common. We typically end up focusing on libido or orgasm issues. There can be pain issues that occur, with intercourse, and pain is never normal. Let me just say, you should never be told to go drink a glass of wine or relax or whatever. That's, if it's painful, it's not right. And that should be addressed. So those are sort of the common buckets that we're seeing, and they all have sort of different causes and treatment options, but a lot of it, and then there's a lot of, it's sort of biopsychosocial. So it's not always just a biologic problem, right? And I think I wanted to mention that earlier too, that the reason sexual health is because it's a huge part of your mental health too. So we spend a lot of time thinking about sex, maybe participating in sex, wanting sex. And when you have a problem in the sexual department, no matter who you are, it affects your brain. So I tell everybody, it doesn't matter if you are just having an issue because your hormones are off or because your blood flow is off, you're still going to have a problem in your brain because it's stressful, right? When something's not working the way it should, and you're seeing people on the media like have orgasms within minutes and having this amazing sex, and you're like, man, why is that not me, right? And what's wrong with me? Am I broken? Like that's in your head, and that's going to affect your ability to perform. Stress affects your ability to have sex. Stress and anxiety and depression, they all affect your ability to have normal sexual function. So that's what we say. It's a biopsychosocial model.
Right. Wow. And it feeds into each other. It becomes a vicious circle. I don't think that it's so obvious, but it's not talked about enough. And I know that a lot of couples experience this, and how stress, especially for women, can suppress that desire. Right. Absolutely. And just like, I have a friend of mine who's been on the show multiple times, Jolene Johnson, and she had some analogy of like, if I've got piles of laundry and, the kids need to be taken to such and such, and this other kid, we got an appointment at this time, and I haven't even taken a shower and all the things, how on earth am I going to be wanting to, full on have sex and be interested in sex when I've got all this mental stuff that's weighing me down?
Absolutely. And the thing about it is interesting because women look at look at sex as another burden sometimes, or as another chore, whereas men tend to look at it as a stress relief. And so there's actually data that shows that. And so that's a real challenge, is like, how do we get people in the mind frame that sex is supposed to be fun and enjoyable and a time to relieve stress, not a chore, right? And so there's actually really excellent work by Lori Brotto, who's a sex researcher in Vancouver, looking at mindfulness and how that impacts libido and overall sexual satisfaction. They found that women who do participate in mindfulness, and men, have better sex drives and overall improved quality of life because of that. And so it's a huge problem, right? And the stressors are just getting more and more, right? Because I think like when you and I were growing up, I didn't do a ton of sports and activities. I did one thing, right? And I didn't have, my parents didn't worry that much about it because they're like, oh, she's doing fine. But I feel like now there's like all these pressures. You have kids, you got to take them to this activity, that activity, this activity, keeping up with the Joneses, whatever it is, right? And everything's on social media. So you feel this this desire to have some visual aspect to your life, which is stressful. And everyone's stressors are different, right? But there's financial stressors. There's a whole bunch of things that people are dealing with that make it really hard for them to then enjoy this moment, which is supposed to be intimate and pleasurable. Yeah. And then that creates discord between relationships, and nobody wants to address that discord or talk to their partner because they feel shut down, or they feel upset, or they feel not heard. And so there's a lot of it that comes from relationship issues. And it's a real challenge.
All right. I'm going to ask you the biggest question of our day.
Yeah.
How do people deal with all this stress so that they can have better sex? I'm just going to throw this out here. I've been a big proponent, because I'm aware of this. I proactively look for ways to take things off my wife's plate.
That's awesome.
I find little creative ways to, the only thing is like challenging myself sometimes to not say it, that I'm doing the thing. Like, babe,
it's hard.
Hey, I need some points. I'm about to go do this, whatever, adding up the points. We jokingly, she'll, deduct points from time to time. But, just knowing that, today there's just, like you said, there's so much going on, so many new stressors, and, her just wanting to be able to focus on her own wellness, and just like proactively as a partner, just finding ways to help to support her in her having the conditions where she can de-stress, process things, have a moment to herself. All these things I've picked up on doing over the years.
Absolutely. And that's one of the ways, right? Like, I think whether you can or can't do those things, you can certainly try to support her in other ways. So say you don't have the time to do certain chores or certain activities that your partner's doing, or you just don't find them as valuable. So I'll give you an example. My husband will be like, you want to take the kids to do this activity. I don't think it's necessary. Like, that's your responsibility. And I will respect that, right? So it depends on where you're at. But I would say that in terms of figuring out ways, innovative ways to make things easier, right? So whether it's buying a Roomba to like vacuum the floors that does it by itself, right? Or hiring someone once a month or once a week or whatever to come clean your home, whatever it is that you can afford that's reasonable, or, go having her family or your family come over and watch the kids, whatever it is, but taking off some of that responsibility is absolutely helpful. And I joke with my husband, there's like these, we share memes on, social media. And some of the memes that women relate most to are when they see an attractive man doing household chores. And we all joke that that's so hot, right? Because it's like, that's really what gets women excited. It's like, you're helping out. It's not that the chore is really that exciting. It's the fact that like someone's recognizing you, seeing you, and doing that chore for you. So that's part of it. Other things can be actually prioritizing intimacy, right? It's really hard to do that. But think about, we prioritize everything. We prioritize brunch. We prioritize meetings that probably don't need to be meetings. We prioritize a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't need to happen. But we don't ever prioritize intimacy. And I'm not saying sex specifically because it doesn't always have to be penis and vagina sex, right? It can be being intimate. So what that could look like is scheduling, instead of date night, scheduling intimacy time, right? So you drop the kids off, you have a babysitter, whatever it is. And the goal for that time is to connect intimately. So that could be cuddling together, that could be lying together naked, that could be whatever it is that you enjoy, without the pressure of saying we're going to have sex. We're just going to be intimate. If sex happens, that's great. But then making that a scheduled thing and actually going through with it. And you think about like when you used to date when you were younger, right? Like you were excited to go on that date and you were like, oh, we might have sex. It's going to be fun. You didn't know there was going to be sex for sure, but you're like, we might. So I'm going to be prepared for it and I'm going to be excited about it. And so it's sort of the same thing. Like you go in with no expectations except for the fact that you're going to connect with each other, not just go to dinner and talk, but actually physically connect with each other.
Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit more about orgasm.
Yeah.
All right. And not just, again, we can look at this in a kind of a superficial lens, like, oh, that's good. I want some of that. It's fun. It's yummy, whatever the case might be. But why it's so good for our health. Mm-hmm. And also, in the discussion earlier and talking about the clitoris, how much of that, as far as maybe, is there a percentage on how much of like orgasm comes from clitoral stimulation versus other stuff?
Absolutely. So let's start with that question because that's easier to answer, quicker to answer. So we know that about 80 to 85% of women need some form of clitoral stimulation in order to achieve climax. Now, some of them will need it with vaginal stimulation or will like both, but 85% will need clitoral stimulation in order to reach an orgasm. And many women, that's the only way they can, and that's completely normal and completely okay. So that's, the thing. And I think a lot of people, because they're not taught that, don't know that, right? And so if you don't explore yourself or you don't tell your partner, you may never have an orgasm.
Yeah, there are some men that are just like, what is a clitoris?
Exactly.
It is out there. All right.
And I used to teach medical students, and you'd be shocked at how many medical students try to put a catheter into the clitoris and not the urethra, which is the P tube. So even very educated, very smart people don't know. And so I think, because you learn about it, right? But actually looking at it and seeing it in real life, it's shocking, right? So that's really important. In terms of the health benefits of orgasm, there are many, right? So we know that it actually reduces, it brings once you're after the orgasm, your heart rate goes down, your blood pressure goes down, you have better mood, better sleep. So in the short term, orgasms are really good for overall those sorts of things. But we also know that orgasms in general are related to, can also be effective in terms of reducing pain. So if you're having pain or discomfort, having an orgasm can often reduce your pain, your pain, or heighten your pain threshold. So that is valuable for sometimes people who may be having pain in their body somewhere. So there's a lot of benefits to having orgasms. And so when people talk about, they sort of get get upset about masturbation. A lot of times that's the only way someone's getting an orgasm, and that's the only way they're reaching those benefits of orgasm. And so in my mind, as long as you're whichever way you're getting to orgasm, as long as it's healthy, meaning you're not spending an inordinate amount of time trying to achieve orgasm related to other things in your life, right? And you're doing it with consent and you're doing it safely, it's great, because there are so many benefits to orgasm.
All right, let's, I've been keeping it together. All right. Now, I'm curious. Obviously, you talked a little bit about the different ways of stimulating the clitoris.
Mm-hmm.
What about, are there any ideal sexual positions that would maybe, that would kind of automatically happen as well? There's a lot of positions out there on the streets, all right? I remember I saw this like Kama Sutra poster one time. It's just like, there's a lot of ways to do this.
Yeah.
But are there certain positions that can kind of just de facto stimulate the clitoris as well?
So typically, and there's actually been data on this. So there's studies where they've looked at different positions. They've looked at like, they've given them names like rocking, angling, and a variety of different names. But essentially what they found is that with the woman on top, one that allows her to sort of position herself in a way that may allow for more clitoral stimulation. So that sometimes is more likely to lead to orgasm. The other one, sort of like rocking or angling your body in such a way where you're penetrating, but also sort of stimulating the clitoris, can be helpful. Sometimes these positions take some practice, right? Because it's sort of like some of them you actually both have to move in a certain way. There's one called the coital alignment technique, which is like, you're both moving in a rocking position and you're like positioned in a way where it's directly on top of the clitoris. And it actually takes a little bit of sort of, coordination. And so
dancing.
You got to sort of practice, right?
Patrick
And like
Swayze.
figure, yeah. So you got to sort of practice, and that's okay, right? Because if ultimately the goal is to have a enjoyable sexual experience, like, so what if one time sex is not so great? You're just trying to figure it out so that the next time can be even better. And I think that we put a lot of weight on like, oh, you have sex with one person one time and it sucks. It's not meant to be. Like, I'd rather have bad sex and then amazing sex than have good sex once and then, be like, oh, that's the one. And then the sex starts sucking because they stopped trying so hard,
Oh, wow. So hard. Trying so hard. All right. I've been holding back on those. Okay. Let's shift gears now and talk about men's sexual health a little bit more. Talking about male sexual health and erectile dysfunction has, oh my goodness, it's like this is a multi-billion-dollar industry now for pharmaceutical companies. There's all kinds of stuff. But these are oftentimes Band-Aid solutions, right? So these are not treating the underlying cause of the erectile dysfunction. So what is at the root? Why is erectile dysfunction on the rise? And you see, I said on the rise, all right? I couldn't help myself.
Erectile dysfunction is on the rise because of the rise of comorbidities, right? We have more diabetes, more high blood pressure, more high cholesterol than we've ever had before. And you know this, you're a nutritionist, like this is routed in inactivity and poor nutrition, right? The large majority of these issues are coming from that. Now, there's hormonal issues. Certainly low testosterone is a very small percentage of reasons for men to have erectile dysfunction. It's about 3%. So when people are like very concerned about their testosterone, there are a multitude of benefits to testosterone, but just because you are low doesn't mean that fixing that is going to fix your erections all the time. And if you're not low, then there's probably some other reason that you're having issues. Now, there's also probably more psychogenic erectile dysfunction, meaning people are more stressed, more anxious. And so they're developing psychogenic ED. You think about it as a young guy. If you have an issue with an erection one time, that is so stressful, right? And then you go to your next encounter and you're stressed. Am I going to get an erection? Am I going to get one? Is it going to happen? Of course you don't, because you're stressed. And then you're like, something's wrong with me, right? And then it's horrible. It's a horrible experience. And the other thing that's very infrequently talked about is pelvic floor dysfunction. And so that is, we all have a pelvic floor. It's these bowl of muscles that sits in our pelvis that holds everything up. It's actually a part of your core. And what happens is sometimes due to certain stress, anxiety, due to sort of mobility issues with the function of your pelvic floor due to maybe trauma, due to maybe sitting for long periods of time, we're seeing people develop what's called high tone pelvic floor. And what that means is your pelvic floor is essentially super tense. So it's like your bicep is stuck like this. And so one, it can't relax, and it also can't go through its full range of motion. It's sort of stuck here. So you could think that if this happened for long periods of time, you're now not getting good blood flow to your muscles. You're not getting good blood. You're getting pain maybe in your elbow, your shoulder, your wrist, a variety of different areas that are not even related to the bicep, right? Or not even directly related, right? So similarly, when you get pelvic floor dysfunction, it can present in a whole host of different ways, one of which is erectile dysfunction. But it can also present with pain with erections, pain with ejaculation. It can present with maybe changes in sensation, constipation, back pain, hip pain. So a whole host of different things. But, that is another thing that I'm seeing a rise of, particularly during COVID. I saw a lot of it because people were sitting and stressed. And so, that's a big part of it. But so these are all the reasons that erectile dysfunction is becoming more common. And we're also living longer. So you're going to see more erectile dysfunction because 50% of 50-year-olds are going to have ED, 60% of 60-year-olds, 70% of 70-year-olds, and so on and so forth.
Holy moly. All right. This really goes back to something very practical, like our lifestyle and, being chair-bound and sedentary and the rising comorbidities and for us, and then again, it's a vicious circle, right? It feeds back into itself. But the thing that stood out the most in that is the psychosocial connection, right? Just how much our thoughts influence our sexual function, because that's really what it is. It's based on our thoughts, our perception of things, and whether we're, quote, turned on or not. And it can be, of course, like subconscious things happen on accident in a way, of course. But still, it's what's governing how your body's responding for men and women. And so really, like, how are you dealing with the stress in your life? Like, what is your perception about your own well-being? And like you just said, like being, kind of having like a psychological turmoil based on a sexual experience, right? So my question is, the same thing holds true with men. What can we do to better manage our stress, to feel better about ourselves, to feel better about our bodies, and thus have better erections?
Yes. So I think when you're in a long-term relationship, it's a little easier because as long as your partner's on board, you can work together to sort of step back, right? So if it's starting to like be present during sex, like we're talking about being present in a conversation, but it's also being present and enjoying the sensations, right? Like enjoying the feelings, enjoying this, and not thinking about what your body's doing or not doing. And so very often when you see a sex therapist, the first thing they'll say is stop having sex and actually do something like sensate focus, where you just get naked and you just touch each other, and you just touch each other everywhere except the genitals. So now you're not focused on your genitals. You're just remembering what areas that you touch feel good, and you're experiencing that. And then as you start feeling more confident with that, you then go to starting touching genitals. And then after you start feeling comfortable with genitals, you can then consider doing penetrative sex. But it's sort of like taking a stepwise approach to then get you back to feeling comfortable in those scenarios so that you're not thinking about, am I going to have an erection or not? And also sometimes just saying it, right? Like, I'm worried about my erection. And if your partner is like, I don't care. Like as long as they know it's not them that's causing you to lose your erection, then they're going to feel okay about it, right? They want to, if you're like, I'm still committed to making sure you have pleasure and I still would like to have pleasure, like, then you guys can work through that together, And I think that the big misconception comes from when people are not talking about it and they start feeling like, oh, it's me. They're not having an erection because it's my fault. And now you feel embarrassed. And then you're like, oh, this is not going to work, or whatever the situation is.
Wow. Yeah. This goes back to, this has been a thread throughout this conversation, which is just talking. Having communication. It's so funny. Like, we say this stuff in culture, communication's the key, but really, like, actually, and I think this goes back to another issue, which is just having the time or creating the time, allowing the time for you to have that communication with all the craziness going on in life. And that's another thing that's lacking today for many couples. I want to ask you about, so if getting an erection isn't the issue, but the quality, right? If people are wanting to improve the quality, and I would imagine this is rooted in having good blood flow. What are some of the things that people can do to improve the quality of their erection?
Absolutely. So it's the same things that we talk about in general, right? What is good for your penis is good for your heart. What's good for your heart is good for your penis, and good for your brain, and good for, like, all the important organs, right? So exercise, eat right, those sorts of things. But beyond that, so that's first and foremost, like, don't go searching for treatments until you've really fix those problems, right? And then in terms of, we talked about psychogenic issues. The other thing that I find that helps sometimes is giving someone a Band-Aid, right? Giving someone a low dose of tadalafil, for example, a medication for erections, just so they can get their confidence back in terms of, like, oh, I can get an erection and it's working great and things are great again. And, like, you get that confidence back, and then you can go off it and see how you do, right? And so it sort of like helps break the cycle sometimes. And so that can be an option in terms of, if you are seriously having psychological issues. Now, if you want the quality to be better, absolutely is things that improve blood flow, which would be increasing diet, increasing exercise. Over time, you're going to see that your erection quality is going to get better too. In fact, they did a study where they compared men who did exercise to men who took a Viagra, for example, and they saw the improvements were the same. So actually doing something completely natural, like working out or doing exercise, doesn't have to be actually going to the gym, right? Any sort of form of exercise will improve erections. So that's one. Two is, there are, of course, medications I've talked about that can help. And these work by essentially creating more blood flow to the erection. So they're Band-Aids. They're not fixing the issue. And nothing you take, at least orally as a pill right now, is going to reverse the issue. Even if you take a supplement or something like that, it's just increasing the body's way of getting blood flow to the area. But the second you stop taking it, it goes away, right? So those are sort of, and then there's other options, right, that are more invasive that I wouldn't recommend if you're just trying to improve the maintenance of your erection, right? You have an erection already. I wouldn't probably go overboard. Now, in terms of things that are available that are, sort of you're hearing about in terms of, like, reversing ED or increasing blood vessels in the penis, for example, one of these is shockwave. So it's using acoustic shockwaves to the penis that creates, like, this mechanical trauma to the erectile tissue that your body then sends growth factors in to create new blood vessels. And so basically it's responding to this trauma by actually then going in and sending growth factors to create more blood vessels. So this is actually, in theory, reversing the condition. Now, this is still considered experimental in the United States. It's in Europe, it's accepted now as formerly in the guidelines. In the US, I think we're getting there soon too. We have about 10 years of data on shockwave therapy, specifically focused shockwave therapy, not radial shockwave therapy. And that has shown to improve erectile dysfunction in mild to moderate erectile dysfunction, meaning that you can either, your erection is not as great quality, or you lose it too soon, or you maybe respond to medications, but you can still get an erection. And so in that category of men who have problems with blood flow, not other issues, right? Not hormone issues, not pelvic floor issues, not psychological issues, but specifically they also have blood flow issues. You're seeing in that group of men where you're seeing about a 70% success rate at 3 months, meaning that people are getting better erections. And at a year, that goes down to about 50%. So probably whatever is causing that blood flow vascular problem is continuing, even though you've done this. And so there's some maintenance that needs to be done. But ultimately, that's the one I would say that has the best data, because it has about a decade of research. Now, there's other things that people will talk about, like PRP injections and stem cells, where the data is pretty immature yet. And I would say that it's not as compelling in multiple studies that's positive. So there's mixed reviews, and stem cells has very little review. So I would say at this point, those are not things that I would say everyone agrees are pretty good, but there are emerging areas. So this is something that we're looking at in terms of in urology and ways to reverse the problem rather than just use a Band-Aid.
This has been fantastic. And I was just saying, I've got like 20 other topics that I want to ask you about. So we definitely have to have you back again. And I just appreciate you so much for deciding to turn that camera on and to start sharing this content and information with people. It's a big part of our lives. And, it's just, unfortunately, not a lot of education about this. And I just really do appreciate it, because you saying yes to doing that is helping so many people. So it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
It's about 2 years ago, hormonal changes hit me out of nowhere. I got on the phone. I was like, Dr. Ernie, I don't know what is going on, but I can't take this. Like, I can't live like this. So what? And he was like, we got your blood work back. And he looked at it and he's like, yeah, your hormones are all over the place. And I'm like, well, how is that possible? Like, I was already on my thyroid meds. I was already taking pregnenolone and progesterone. And he finally looked at me. I've been working with Dr. Ernie for a couple of years. And he said, he goes, Autumn, I can put you on every supplement there is. You can eat every bit of kale and spinach and everything else until you learn to manage your stress. There's only so much I can do for you.